Next, the report's most explosive claim. Who did it? The report says the perpetrators of these crimes are overwhelmingly Muslim men, mostly of Pakistani heritage. And it puts numbers on that, very precise sounding numbers. The first oddity or the first problem I have, it doesn't have a single number. It has 4. Page 8 says 87%. Page 115 says 84%. Page 155 says roughly 90%. And pages 8 and 115 also quote 95%. 4 different figures for the same claim, and the report never explains or never reconciles them. That alone should make you sit up, because real data sets don't wobble like this. But let's do the proper thing. Let's follow each receipt. So let's start with the 87%. Page 8 introduces it like this, word for word from the inquiry. In court records and official inquiries, around 87% of those convicted bore distinctively Muslim names, end quote. In court records and official inquiries. That sounds solid, right? Courts, official inquiries. So I followed the footnote. It's not court records. It's not an official inquiry. It's a 2018 article on the website of a Christian campaign group describing a list put together by one activist, a private individual who collected court cases he'd seen reported in the newspapers. He then counted how many of the convicted men had names that sounded Muslim to him. 275 names out of 317. That's the entire method. That's where your 87% is coming from. Now, this method has 2 distinct problems. Problem number 1, a name is not a religion. The names Adam or Solomon are Muslim and Christian names. Heck, even atheists use these names. And so is Sarah and Hannah. These names might never have set foot in a mosque in their life. You cannot read belief off a birth certificate. And it cuts the other way. A convert to Islam called Dave Smith might never show up in the count at all. Counting names tells you roughly about family background, but this report's entire argument is about belief. It claims religion drove the crimes, and by the way, I'll do you one better. Later on, I'll be presenting Islam's position on these crimes directly from scripture, because I'm qualified to do so. Tommy Robinson, Rupert Law, Elon Musk are not academically trained to speak on theology, let alone Islamic theology and practice. Problem number 2, just in case nobody told you guys, newspapers are not a database. The press does not report every court case in Britain. It reports the ones that make striking stories. And for a decade, Asian grooming gang was exactly the kind of story that made front pages. So a list that is built from press coverage is shaped by what editors chose to cover, not by what actually happened across the country. It's like judging every dog in Britain by the ones that made the news for biting somebody. The ones in the news are real. We're not saying they're not. They're just not the entire picture. The next percentage, 84%, on page 115, word for word. Analysis of 264 convictions for group-based child sexual exploitation from 2005 to 2017 found that 84%, 222 of the offenders were South Asian, with the vast majority Pakistani Muslim. End quote. Now, this one at least comes from a real published study by a think tank called Quilliam in 2017. But there are 3 things the report doesn't tell you about that study, and you deserve to know that. Number 1, the study's own category was Asian, just Asian, a broad label. The words South Asian and Pakistani Muslim were added by this report. The study never recorded anyone's religion. It couldn't have. Courts don't record it. Number 2, the study built its list of 264 convictions the same way as our activists, from cases reported in the media. It's the same headline problem as before. The study is bogus. Number 3, and this is the one that should end the argument, the British government's own review already examined that study and threw it out. In December 2020, the Home Office, that's the government department in charge of policing, they published a review of all the research on exactly this question. And its verdict on the Quilliam study, in its own words, I quote, not suitable for drawing conclusions about the ethnicity of these offenders. Independent academics went even further. They checked the study's own source material and they reported finding more than 100 white offenders who fitted its own definition but weren't in the count. And they did this in less than half a day of searching. Maybe you think the Home Office was wrong. Fine. That's a debate you're allowed to have. But a report that hands you the 84% without ever mentioning that the government's own review rejected it, that's not independent journalism. That sounds like somebody who's already reached a conclusion and they're trying to convince you of their conclusion. The next percentage, 90%. Page 155, roughly 90% of those convicted, quote, in relevant grooming gang cases had Muslim names, according to researchers. Which researchers? It doesn't say. No name, no study, this time, not even a footnote you can follow. A number you cannot check is not evidence. It's just decoration. And focus on the phrase relevant grooming gang cases. Oh, who decided which cases were relevant? If you only count the cases that fit your narrative and then announce the count fits your narrative, you've just gone in a circle and called it research. And finally, the 95% statistic, the biggest number of all, quoted twice and presented as expert opinion. What was the source? One man, Taj Hagi. For those of you who aren't acquainted with the gentleman, he's a Quran-only academic. He rejects hadith and scholarly consensus, whilst also in favor of highly unorthodox practices. And truth be told, he frequently appears in right-wing media and advocates for bans on Islamic face veils and other such things. Anyway, he was speaking off the cuff in a TV interview. I found the original article, his actual words. He asked, why is it that virtually every single person in these grooming gangs are Muslim? And then off the cuff as a hyperbolic statement, he says, seems like 95% of them are, end quote. It seems like? This is a man on television sharing his opinion. He didn't claim to have data. There is no study behind it. It's a guess. And the report takes this guess, calls it a proportion, and compares it with national census figures. They've just dressed it up as a statistic. So there's the four main numbers that appear in this report. 87%, which is just a name count of newspaper stories. 84%, which is a study the government's own review rejected and independent analysts found holes in. The 90%, which is an unnamed analysis nobody can find. And then finally the 95%, which is just a guess from a random individual. That is the entire statistical foundation of the percentages that me and you have seen shared 1 million times online over the past few weeks. Is there real data on who commits these crimes? Yes, there is. There's 7 data sets worth from 2011 to 2015, including a government review that this report pretends doesn't exist, and a 2025 audit that found genuine overrepresentation in specific places. Now, I'm going to read you every single one of them in the second half, in date order, nothing hidden. But for now, one sentence to hold on to. Not one of those real data sets, not one, says anything like 84% or 87% or 90% or 95% Muslim. Remember these 4 numbers because we're going to bury them properly later on.